Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon. Were there really female U.S. Marshals in 1923? 1923's Marshal Mamie Fawcett raises an interesting question about U.S. history, which is whether female U.S. Marshals actually existed in this time period. Taylor Sheridan's Yellowstone franchise may be rooted in real-world ideas and political stances, but the writer/producer has been known to take his creative liberties to suit a more dramatic narrative. It's television after all, and no one is expecting total accuracy. The unrealistic aspects are part of what makes Sheridan's television so entertaining. Actress Jennifer Carpenter, Dexter, White Chicks, joined 1923's Season 2 cast as Marshal Mamie Fawcett, a law enforcement officer in West Texas. She's become an ally to some of our heroes, though 1923 Season 2, Episode 5, saw her pick up Spencer Dutton, believing him to be part of the ongoing hunt for Tiana Rainwater. In a scene in her office, she speaks to Montana's Sheriff McDowell on the phone, and the sheriff exclaims that he didn't know female marshals existed, prompting us to look into the matter. The United States Marshal Service dates all the way back to the Judiciary Act of 1789, which was voted on during the first session of the first U.S. Congress and officially signed by President George Washington himself. U.S. Marshals fulfill a specific service, finding and arresting federal suspects. While it took quite a while for women to become part of this service, it happened long before 1923, when lawyer Phoebe Couzens was appointed to the U.S. Marshal Service. In 1884, John Couzens became a U.S. Marshal in Missouri, and Phoebe was one of his deputies. Following his death in 1887, she took over the role for 2 months, becoming the first woman to hold the position before she was replaced. Word of this event likely wouldn't have spread around the country, especially not all the way to Montana, due to how brief it was. Still, it set a precedent for women, and it's believable that 4 decades later, Mamie Fawcett might have the job, but McDowell still wouldn't know about it. Mamie Fawcett is an interesting character in 1923, offering a law enforcement officer in the midst of the ruthless hunt for Tiana Rainwater. Marshal Kent and Father Renaud are vicious and seem like characters straight out of a Cormac McCarthy novel, so it's vital to have someone strong to balance them out. After 1923 Season 2, Episode 5's cliffhanger ending, Fawcett might be more critical than ever in a bloodbath follow-up, 1923's penultimate episode. The year is 1923. Jazz music echoes from speakeasies, the scent of bootleg liquor clings to alleyways, and the nation pulses with the energy of a post-war world hurtling into modernity. It's a time of flappers and Ford Model Ts, of shifting gender roles and roaring ambition. But amid all the cultural noise of the Roaring Twenties, one might wonder, could a woman really have been a U.S. Marshal in this era of grit and glamour? At first glance, the idea sounds like pure fiction, perhaps the plot of a revisionist Western or a gritty HBO series. But reality, as it often does, blurs the boundaries of expectation. The role of a U.S. Marshal. The U.S. Marshal Service, established in 1789, is the oldest federal law enforcement agency in the United States. Marshals have historically been responsible for tasks like apprehending fugitives, transporting prisoners, protecting federal judges, and managing assets seized from criminals. It was, and still is, a tough, often dangerous job, a natural magnet for bold spirits, no matter their gender. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the overwhelming majority of U.S. Marshals were men. Law enforcement, like so many professions, was deeply embedded in a male-dominated system. Still, that doesn't mean women weren't involved. In fact, history reveals a few bold pioneers who defied societal norms and left their mark, sometimes officially, sometimes unofficially. The first female deputy U.S. Marshal. To understand the plausibility of a woman wearing the star in 1923, we must travel back even further, to 1891, when Maybelle Sherwood of the Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, became one of the first women to serve as a deputy U.S. Marshal. She was hired to escort female prisoners, a task considered suitable for a woman at the time. Though her role was limited, she was, without question, a sworn deputy. Her badge was real. Perhaps even more famous is Bass Reeves, one of the first Black deputy U.S. Marshals west of the Mississippi, whose story is often told alongside legends of women who assisted lawmen on the frontier, wives, daughters, widows, or unlikely heroines who filled in when duty called. Many of these women never had their names written down in history books, but they were there, often in the background, sometimes stepping forward in moments of crisis. 1923. A shifting landscape. By 1923, the tide was beginning to turn. Women had won the right to vote just 3 years earlier with the 19th Amendment. The idea of women in professional roles, especially those tied to government and public service, was gaining slow but real traction. It's important to remember that Prohibition was in full swing in 1923. The Volstead Act, which enforced the 18th Amendment, turned everyday folks into bootleggers and revolutionized the world of crime. This era opened up unexpected opportunities for women in law enforcement. Agencies needed more people to enforce the ever-growing list of prohibition-related crimes. Women were often hired to work undercover, especially in cases involving speakeasies, social clubs, and women suspects. While records of officially appointed female U.S. Marshals in 1923 are scarce, it's not out of the realm of possibility. The term marshal is often used loosely. Many women were more likely to have served as deputy marshals, special deputies, or worked in civilian roles within the marshal service. Still, some women carried badges, took oaths, and performed dangerous tasks alongside their male counterparts. The quiet trailblazers. One particularly interesting figure is Delia Akeley, an explorer and anthropologist active in the 1920s who traveled extensively and lived a life most would associate with adventurers or lawmen of the era. While not a U.S. Marshal, her fearless independence symbolized the kind of woman who could have been one. Women like her made the idea of female marshals more conceivable, if not yet common. We also know that in 1922, Esther Clark Hill became the first female federal judge advocate, and in 1920, Alice Stebbins Wells was already patrolling the streets of Los Angeles as one of the country's first female police officers. If women could be detectives, police officers, and federal prosecutors, it's certainly within the realm of possibility that a determined woman might also have earned the badge of a U.S. Marshal. Fiction reflects reality. Sometimes television and film have helped popularize the notion of a female U.S. Marshal in early 20th century America. Shows like Justified, Deadwood, or even 1923, the Yellowstone prequel series, depict strong, complex women in frontier law enforcement roles. While dramatized, these portrayals often draw inspiration from real history, even when the specifics are embellished. And it's worth noting, Hollywood and fiction can sometimes do what official records failed to. Remember the contributions of women whose lives didn't make the headlines. The bottom line. So, were there really female U.S. Marshals in 1923? The honest answer is yes, but few, and often forgotten. While there is no record of a woman serving as a chief U.S. Marshal, the head of a district, in that exact year, it's entirely plausible that women served as deputy marshals or in related enforcement roles. They may have escorted prisoners, served warrants, or worked undercover during Prohibition. They may not have made the front pages, but they were present, badge on chest, quietly rewriting the rules of who could wear it. In 21st century America, women now hold prominent positions across law enforcement, including as U.S. Marshals. These modern-day leaders stand on the shoulders of the brave, often unnamed women of the past, those who served in dusty offices, guarded prisoners on trains, or helped bring order to a chaotic, changing nation. Their stories may not be as loud as the gunfights of the Old West, but they echo just as powerfully through time. And maybe, just maybe, in some dusty courthouse archive or forgotten ledger, the name of a woman U.S. Marshal from 1923 is waiting to be rediscovered.